Welcome to Gold Derby's Q&A panel on the making of the Apple TV Plus series Severance. Today, I am happy to be joined by director and executive producer Ben Stiller, creator, writer, and executive producer Dan Erickson, lead actor Adam Scott, who plays Mark, cinematographer Jessica Lee Gagne, and casting director Rachel Tenner. Such a pleasure to have you all. Ben, let's just start with you. You came across Dan's script. He had written it a while back. I'm curious, how does this work? Because I've heard this story. I came across a script. How does one come across the script? Do you have a yes, no, maybe pile? What's the process?
I was walking on Hollywood Boulevard, just fluttering in the wind.
Just showered with scripts on Hollywood Boulevard. Must be nice.
Yeah. I don't know why you'd left it on Hollywood Boulevard.
It worked.
No, it was, I've had a production company for about over 20 years, I guess. And Jackie Cohn, who's a creative executive there, read it as a writing sample of Dan's. And I guess, Dan, your manager or agent had sent it in, or?
My manager had sent it in, yeah. And we had sort of been sending it around, different places. My manager, Ben Blake, and I had a previous relationship with Jackie from meeting her for a different thing. And it had gotten on this publication called The Blood List, sort of like a horror sci-fi specific version of The Blacklist. And yeah, that was, I think, when it came back on Jackie's radar, and then she had suggested it to Ben.
I never knew about The Blood List until like last week.
Really?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't keep it from you on purpose.
I'd never heard of it either. The Blood List.
When did you come up with the general premise of this show, and when did you write it? And what were you doing while you waited for this script to be discovered? Because this is your first big sell. So I'd tell that story.
Yeah. So I first script when I was working at a door factory. It was literally like a facility that would make and ship out doors and gates to different places. And it was a nice place run by nice people. And I was happy to have a job. This was just coming off of grad school, and it was like the first Craigslist job I could find. But it wasn't what I wanted to be doing necessarily. And so I would come in and be cataloging hinges and different door parts all day, and just one day walked in and found myself being like, God, if there was a way to just not experience the next 8 hours and just pawn that off somehow and have it immediately be 5 p.m. and I'm going home, like I would do that. Like, God, I would do that every day. And noticed that was kind of a strange thing to sort of catch myself wanting. And so, I had, like I said, I just finished grad school for TV writing. And so I was sort of always looking for show concepts, and this sort of felt like something that would naturally lend itself to something like that. And so then started thinking about like, why might somebody do that if it were possible, and what kind of company would, and why, from the company's perspective, would that seem good? And so it sort of became this whole, the conspiracy and the corporate mystery stuff all just sort of naturally came from that. And then I was writing it over the course of a couple years, really. I was sort of would write it for a while and then do something else for a while, come back to it. But during that time, I was working just all sorts of different office jobs, mostly non-entertainment industry, a lot of temp jobs where I would go and sort of have to quickly adapt and sort of felt like I was putting on a mask and becoming a new person at each of these different places I went. And so all of that informed the story and sort of the theme of how we're such different people depending on where we work, and when we walk in there and we're doing what we think is expected of us. And then so much of the fun, weird corporate stuff came into it. Was just in some cases I feel like I tamped it down, like how crazy some of the like like the 9 core principles and all these weird sort of pseudo philosophical things that they're presenting to you at this company, when all you want is for them to fix the printer, and so a lot of that just came out of my own experience working those crazy jobs.
And Adam, for you, was it Ben that called you and told you about this role, or how did you become involved?
Yeah, Ben called me. I think we figured out that it was January of 2017. That
long time ago.
Yeah, it was a while back. But just kind of told me the quick pitch, the big idea of the show, and I think it was a few months after he and Dan had started chatting, so it was pretty early on, and it was a couple of years before I ever really actually took a look at material. But that whole time, I couldn't really get this sticky idea out of my head. It just sounded so fun and kind of sparked my imagination, and I couldn't really stop thinking about it and all the different directions it could go.
Ben, what made you think of Adam?
I was thinking you might ask me that, and I was trying to think of it ahead of time. And what came to me was just that I don't think I've ever had a moment in thinking of something as a director, casting wise, where an actor has just come into my head so quickly reading something. And I guess Dan and I didn't talk about this for a long time, but Dan, you said you had Adam in mind. We'd never talked about this, but he instantly came to mind for a lot of reasons. But I can't tell you exactly what the one specific one was, other than I thought, oh, Adam would be perfect. But you had thought that too, Dan.
Yeah. No, it was a test. I'm like, if this guy suggests Adam Scott, he can direct it. And if not, I'm walking. Walking, not walking. But no, I had written it like I had always sort of thought like, okay, this is sort of like an Adam Scott type character. I mean, this is, and I obviously knew Adam very well from the various, classic workplace comedies that he was already known for, but also, had seen him do much darker turns, and other stuff like The Vicious Kind. And so I had always sort of really, respected Adam's work and as an actor, and liked sort of every actor that they come into it with, the viewer has a knowledge of them and their previous work. And I thought that this was such an interesting take on sort of the workplace story. And so bringing in somebody who was known for a number of different shows like that, it just gave it this really cool, interesting new dimension. So yeah, I had always thought about Adam when I was writing it. And so then when Ben said that, I was just kind of like, okay, yeah, sure, fine.
That's all
with that.
So nice of you guys to say. But I have to say, to be honest, when I first actually was able to read a couple scripts, I was like, this is so good. And this is exactly what I've always wanted to do. There's no way I'm going to actually get to do this. There's no way. But if I am able to actually do this, it'll be because I've, at least in my mind, I've been working to try and earn a role like this whole time, because it is exactly what I've always, want. It's that kind of role that since you're a little kid, if you want to be an actor, this is that sort of role you always sort of dream of playing.
Yeah, and I mean, we were so excited to get him, and that's why it was such a disappointment when he came on set and just biffed it.
Yeah,
right.
We all sensed that.
We really thought it was going to be good.
Yeah, the recasting is going to be really difficult for season 2, but yeah,
it'll be interesting though, just to see who you guys bring in.
Right.
Rachel, I don't know where to start with you as a casting director, other than maybe good job. I mean, I think it's one of the best ensembles I've seen on TV in recent years. It's so incredible. Talk about casting the process, or the casting process, and what it was like to bring all of these incredible characters to life through your casting work?
I mean, I really enjoyed the casting process on that. I mean, Ben's here. Usually I'm by myself having to talk about this, but now I have somebody who's a witness. But it was, you know, Ben, I've worked with Ben now for a while, so I feel like there's a really kind of collaborative and safe space in casting, you know, to kind of like do what you want to do and see if it works. But once we knew Adam, you know, once Adam was set, then it really just kind of opened up everything to doing a normal process of casting. You know, we didn't have to put like a name actor in every role or do that kind of exercise. So, you know, we saw a ton of people for Helly, you know, and Britt just at the end of the day, like she won the role, you know, and I've known Britt, you know, like through some of her other work, but she hadn't, I think, had something yet that everyone knew her for. So, so that was exciting to have her, Zach Cherry. I think the hardest role was Deachin's role, was Miss Casey, don't you think, Ben? Yeah, so that was like, after Helly was set, I think the next real big challenge was Miss Casey, and that
What's so
also
difficult about her to cast? Can you embellish on that?
I mean, she was so mysterious. I mean, there's two parts to her, right? There's the, you know, what eventually
Hey,
would be the wife.
spoilers.
My wife, my
Well,
sister.
hopefully anybody who's watching this has watched the show, I guess.
Exactly. Well, there are two parts to her that we are interested in. And so, but she really had to sell this, you know, mystery and have this, you know, quality to her that's really difficult to find, you know, and the audition scenes were very much like, you know, hello, you know, how are you? Like very specific. And so tonally was difficult. It was a lot of pieces coming together for her too.
Because
I was
also
really-
we didn't want to give the secret or any sort
Yeah,
of secrets
right.
away to the actors, right? So it was hard to tell them what I don't know, but I'm assuming it was tough to. I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
And I also think now we're living in the era of the self-tape for actors in terms of auditioning. I think it was kind of, and Rachel, you know more about this than I do, but it used to be you go into the casting office and you sit and you wait outside, and then they call you in and you get really nervous. I would, this is how I would sit outside, get really nervous, go in, do my audition, tank it and leave and not get a call back. Or do well and then get another call back and then tank it on the callback. But now, and especially since the pandemic, you know, it's almost, wouldn't you say, Rachel, it's almost all self-tape?
Oh, yeah. Since the pandemic started, it's only been self-tapes now. You know, with people slowly making their way back to doing something in the room.
And I'm amazed at what actors do to prepare for these, because you see these incredible auditions, people coming in incredibly prepared, they off book. It's almost expected that actors haven't memorized, and they will self-produce these auditions that are you know, that really stand out. When like Deachin and Britt both had these self-produced self-tapes that almost felt like you were watching a movie. And it was very clear. I mean, it wasn't the production value as much as how they set up the camera and were, I don't know how many takes they did, but whatever they sent in was just, it really stood out. And I was really impressed. I'm impressed by all the actors who are doing that now, because it's a lot of work to do that. I think, I remember that on Dannemora, on Escape at Dannemora, Eric Lang.
Oh, Eric Lang. Oh my God.
Eric Lang did that.
Right.
And
He's incredible.
Yeah.
It was just one of those, and just to Rachel's, just to talk about Rachel and I mean, we've been working together probably for what, 12, 13
12 years. Yeah. Oh my God, like 12
years, something like that. And Rachel will get an idea in her head and will tell me this actor is playing this role. She'll just say it. And I don't necessarily disagree with it, but I think we do know each other well enough that we have, we trust each other too, and we'll have discussions. But when she comes in with an idea, usually I try to do that, is like try to be collaborative and listen, because I trust her instinct. And I remember with Irving, with you, like right off the bat, you were like John Turturro.
Oh, right,
Like,
right,
well,
right.
yeah, John Turturro is great. And it's always the same thing. Like, yeah, John Turturro is great. Okay, go get John Turturro. You know?
But here's the difference
Um,
though, because I want to see the difference on things I work on. You can come up with a lofty idea and then Ben gets them. Like, you know,
and she
like,
sends me out to have to figure
yeah,
out.
he goes, exactly. I call it get stillered. I'm always like, oh, someone just got stillered.
And
Like,
you're like, "Man, just go tell John Turturro to do it."
I spoke with
Okay.
John Turturro and he said he did go to dinner with you. And
right.
so
Yeah, 'cause Rachel
it sounds
told
like
me
it's
this.
true.
But I
No,
feel so
Dan and I went to
confident.
dinner with it, but yeah, anyway.
Yeah.
I went to the wrong place at first. It was really stressful.
Oh,
Oh no.
Yeah.
Oh, right. That's right. The Italian restaurant in Brooklyn. Right?
yeah.
Yeah.
I relate.
There was like
Me-
another part of the restaurant I was sitting at for 20 minutes. I was like, I blew it.
I'm trying to.
I
pitch him,
remember Ben being collaborative and just asking, like, what about Irving? What do you think about Irving? Do you have any just kind of ideas? He's just sort of asking around for casting ideas. And I remember writing down some names, all terrific actors, but mostly, you know, like people I see doing really great turns and guest spots and stuff, and kind of gave this list. And that's the difference of working with someone like Ben, because he's like, oh, you know what? I was thinking of giving John Turturro a call. And it's like, oh, okay, well, yeah, one of the great actors of our time. I'll just put my list of, again, terrific actors away and let you do your thing.
but now you see the food chain, how really it's just me repeating what Rachel said.
Right. That was Rachel all along.
I feel like, yeah, that's my favorite thing. Like, I'll say to Ben, I'll be like, okay, like, I have an idea. You got, like, hear me out. And then he'll be like, that's great, or that's terrible.
But sometimes you'll have a crazy idea that I'll be like, that's crazy. I think that's an awful idea. And then you'll be like, but then it makes me think about it. And, you know, like I said, 50-50, sometimes I still think it's an awful idea, or it ends up being this brilliant.
Totally.
Jessica, what about this Lumen world intrigued you the most to come in, work with Ben again? I mean, you've been working with Ben before as well, and be able to capture two different worlds, you know, the inside world and the outside world. You know, what was that like for you?
Well, I was the one who was not intrigued because I was afraid. Like, my ego was in the way. I'm like, I don't want to do an office show. I was freaking out about it. But Ben saw something that I never saw, I guess. Like, the writing was great. It was amazing, Dan. But I was really self-conscious, and I think being a little self-centered and not being able to see the potential. And I think that fear and that challenge is really what pushed me personally. I don't know, Ben, if you can speak to this, but we kind of developed a bit of an obsession of, it's an office, we need to make this great. Like, we need to do this differently. These hallways, we need to think of ways that are different. So we were constantly thinking and pushing and challenging ourselves. But I want to say one thing, because Rachel, you really, like, it's kind of funny what happens when you say the Stillard thing. I think the same thing happens with locations. So I have like a
My God, right, on Dannemora. Right, go ahead.
like, we're like, we'll never get to shoot here. But like, now I say, Ben's going to make it happen.
Yeah. Can I add to that? Yeah, because on Dannemora,
It's payoffs. They have like an envelope.
exactly. There were, again, all these lofty ideas of where you could shoot, and, you know, all to bring all the authenticity, like the real manhole or this or that. And then he'd be like, oh, I have a meeting with the governor. He'll just like go and then the next day he's like, oh, we got permission to shoot everywhere. In the jail.
That was on Dannemora. That was literally, we had no choice. We had no location for the prison, and we didn't, because New York State Department of Corrections didn't want to give us permission. So because it was a story about an escape from a prison, they didn't want to publicize it. And so I knew somebody who knew the governor, and I called up to see if we could get an audience with the governor. And like we got a reprieve from the governor. The governor literally at the last minute said we could shoot at the prison. But that was just pure luck. And desperation too. But I'll say with Jessica though, on our show, you know, Jessica's from Montreal, and you know, what you're talking about, your first reaction to the show. Like, I feel like Jessica and I have, you know, different cultural reference points. Wouldn't you say, Jessica?
Yeah, I mean, I'm French Canadian, so I would think so.
So we have different. So I think the way that I reacted to the script is very different than the way she did, probably because of my sort of, you know, ideas about the genre bending that I think was happening with what Dan was doing. And I think that's what I love about working with Jessica is that we're usually coming at something from very different points of view. And that really, I think, but yet we also kind of like, like the same things aesthetically and have the same ideas about, I think, what we think is, interesting, on camera or cinematically, but we're coming from very different places. So there's always a discussion that happens and that I think makes it better because we're both kind of having to like advocate for what we think about it.
Yeah, we like balance each other out. And I think like one of the biggest feats of Severance is an element of balance in every department. From the cast, which is like super diverse and interesting, like it really balances itself out. And just the idea of being severed is that like there's a weird duality thing happening, but it kind of like shows itself in every department and everything.
I always thought it was a comedy. I know the show isn't really a comedy, but it is based. I think Dan wrote it probably funnier than it ended up being directed. But there was a basis in a genre of comedy, office workplace comedy, that to me was always where the show has been coming from. So that kind of always informed everything for me.
And what is the dynamic of a cinematographer and the director, at least on this series? How do you work together and collaborate? Who's calling which shots? Because we see images. So someone like me who's not there, what is that dynamic like?
I think it depends, right, Ben? Like it depends on whether sometimes you have like a really clear idea, and sometimes I know you want space, and then I know you leave a lot of space for me to help collaborate as well. But like it really never is one thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think Jessica and I met doing on Dannemora, and kind of I think sort of learned how each other worked doing that project, and there's a lot of prep that goes on with Jessica and myself, but I think with Jessica, it's really important to visually create a story in terms of images and reference points before we ever start shooting. And we talk about every scene and every environment a lot before, and Jessica's really involved in maybe more than most cinematographers in location scouting and really kind of the whole, if I can use a French term, mise en scène.
That's the term.
How would French Canadian pronunciation?
Oh, mise en scène.
Mise en scène. Okay. But the whole idea of what you're trying to make, what it's going to look like, the feeling. And then when we get onto the set, since we've had a lot of discussions about that, we kind of know already those big sort of, decisions have been made. Then it becomes about sort of like figuring out the scene. And that's where I feel like actors are so, like Adam, are so important because, being an actor too, it's really hard to do a scene if you're stepping into some sort of a construct that a director has created that doesn't have to do with what's actually going on for you in the scene. So the rehearsal is really important, and that will then dictate really how the scene is going to be shot, unless it's a very specific sequence that's already been preconceived because of for whatever other visual effects reasons, or it's an action sequence or something like that. But the scenes themselves, for me, are dictated by the actors knowing what they want to do, what feels right, and someone like John Turturro or Adam is very, very it's very important to work with them in the blocking of the scene to then figure out how it's going to be shot.
And Ben, you've worked with pretty much everyone here before except for Dan. So is that, as an executive producer or director, is that something that makes you feel comfortable going into a project? And then when you have someone new like Dan, is that concerning or is that exciting?
Well,
How concerning was I?
I think I've known Dan longer than I've known Jessica, because I met Dan on this project before we started doing Dannemora. I don't know. It's like
Dannemora is 2017.
Yeah, so it's around the same time. So Dan and I got to know each other over the years of developing the project, and I'm grateful for Dan because he gave me this piece of material that like was so fascinating, and has, kept me busy for a few years. But, Dan does something that's very, very unique and different than any other writer that I've worked with. So, that's what's fun and exciting for me. And we have a back and forth, and, Dan, I'll let you speak to that. But, that's the process is really important, I think, in creating something, because once you have something on the page, but actually turning it into a movie or a show, there's so many different elements, and being able to react to the different elements and to the changes that are happening in real time as you're making something, is something that I think some writers don't necessarily embrace and can make a difference in, because they have an idea. And Dan, I've never seen anybody who's willing to go back and look at his own work, question it, change it, try things, an endless fountain of ideas, and really, really interesting ideas. And so that process is, for me, like what it's all about when you're making something, and being able to work with somebody who's, has that many ideas and is that interested in the process. That's what's, I found with Dan. And we've actually done it more than I've done with maybe a lot of writers I've worked with over the years.
Yeah, and I mean, it's so funny because every stage of this process, I've been sort of pinching myself, because it all seemed so unlikely at the outset that any of this was going to sort of come to fruition. And the first big surprise for me was that somebody of Ben's stature and on that level and with that kind of a reputation, it was going to be down to take a risk on a totally new property from somebody who had no credits. I knew that Ben is a filmmaker who is always doing creatively really interesting and risky things, but it's just a really hard sell from my perspective to be like, okay, like you're going to have to trust that, like, I've given you a pilot, and you're going to have to trust that I can do 9 of these and that I can keep that story going. And so there was sort of an unexpected sense of trust that I felt from Ben. And then once we started to get into the collaboration, that was sort of the other big surprise, was like Ben understood that there was something that Ben saw in the writing that I see too, because I'm the person who made it. But there was something that Ben tapped into, and sort of understanding the sadness at the core of this idea, and also the weird humor of it. And he was saying, in a way that was very humbling to me, like, yeah, like this is different. This is different, and that's the point, and I want to protect it. And so we've had so many great collaborators that we worked with, but I think the concern with something like this, when you work on something with something on this level, is like, okay, is it going to get watered down? Is it going to get turned into sort of just another version of something we've seen 100 times before, in the translation to the screen? And just from the get-go, like from our very first meeting, it was clear that Ben was not going to let that happen. And, that he was going to sort of hone in on the stuff that made this unique and interesting and augment those things. And so it's the best collaboration you can ask for. And then, again, somebody who is on Ben's level and sort of has the ability to do something without having to compromise. It was great, and it was hard. It was a lot of going back and forth, and sometimes we didn't know where we were going. It was like, we're pushing through to this, but we know there's something better here. We know there's something more special and a purer version of whatever this is, but we don't know what it looks like yet. And sometimes we would just go back and forth until we'd find it. And we had the COVID hit when we were about to shoot, and so we got sort of a elongated version of that process. We were able to go back and really re-examine the scripts even more. but yeah, it's like it's really rare, I think, to have a collaboration like that where truly it keeps getting better. And that was what made it okay when it was like hard, and when it felt like we were doing this forever. It's like, yeah, but it keeps getting cooler. And it's, you know, and that continued into, you know, once everybody else came on board, it was just like every new element that we add to this just makes it better. And that's so exciting.
And in terms of what it was like on set, I mean, there's so many great actors, as we spoke about earlier, and there's comedic elements. I mean, for me, some of the funniest parts are just Patricia Arquette's pure rage. Like, that makes me laugh, because I think she's just so great. What was it like on set? Were there moments where actors were breaking? Are you laughing at each other? And who is the most unbreakable actor that is in the cast?
I don't know. What do you guys think? Did we break? I mean, there was a lot of like trying stuff out. Like the guys have been saying, like we were world building and kind of starting from scratch, right? Like we had these incredible sets, and Jessica and Ben and Dan, and we were all there, these incredible production design, everybody, and this unbelievable cast. But we were kind of starting something new and weren't exactly sure going in how it was going to really feel and sound. And so we had to just sort of start trying different stuff. And it, like Dan said, it was challenging, but it should be challenging because, like, look at what we were doing. And so a lot of the stuff in the scenes, a lot of like Patricia's incredible stuff she was doing, that was one of a variety of directions she would try for any given scene. So yeah, I would certainly break sometimes, but would really try not to, because watching her experiment and try a bunch of different things, and she and Ben sort of huddling and figuring out a different way to try and attack a scene. I wanted to be there and try and honor that and let her experiment and just sort of stay and react as I would in the scene rather than breaking, but it certainly happens sometimes.
I would say she's not here, but I'd say Patricia Arquette is the first person who will crack up.
Probably.
And usually at herself. She makes herself laugh. Because I've never worked with anybody who has more fun doing in the process of acting. It's so genuine, her playfulness. And it reminds me of just like when I used to, like, you know, with my sister, we would make each other laugh when we were kids. It's that kind of feeling I have around her, where I see she really has this really like kind of crazy sense of humor. So when she was playing around with Cobell and trying to figure out who she was, because it really was an experimentation process, and we did try different. We didn't know what was going to work. We knew that, like Dan was saying, we knew there was something there, but we weren't quite sure where the whole thing lived and how much it could sustain in terms of humor and weirdness and seriousness. So we were kind of, you know, when you're making something like this where you don't know what the tone is, you have to experiment, and then you really do kind of look at it when you put it together and you go, okay, this works, this feels like too much, this feels okay. And Patricia was doing the same thing as an actor. So she would yell at Adam and get really scary, and then like we'd cut and then she'd crack up.
Also Selvig was hilarious.
Oh my
too.
God. Yeah. Yeah, because she's playing, and Mrs. Selvig, who, you know, is playing, she's like Cobell playing a part, pretending to be this like sweet neighbor, which we don't even understand why or you know what that's about. And so Patricia was constantly trying to figure out why she was doing this, but yet she, you know, like immediately just came in with this idea and this voice, and the dynamic between her and Adam. I think those were definitely scenes where I would laugh a lot, you know, watching it, because it was sort of like Adam's takes to what, you know, like reacting to her as, you know, the audience is reacting to, like, who is this weird person who's like giving me cookies and like kind of saying these strange things about her dead husband, and like, is she kind of coming on to me, but she's not. she's my aunt, but she's not. And, it was just, it was such a strange, interesting, world. And I think that if Patricia was just always willing to try things and to just, to kind of go, well, maybe this is it, or maybe that's it. And never judging it, never judging herself or anything, just allowing herself the ability to play around and trust that, it would be in there somewhere. And then once we figured that out, it took a while, I think maybe like 6 or 7 months or 8 months into the shoot, it was a long shoot, till we finally kind of locked in and said, oh yeah, that's her, that's what it is.
Yeah, and the fact that Patricia was able to find completely different approaches to throwing the different versions of Mark off balance in each, both inside and outside of Lumen, as these different characters, but throwing Mark off balance and controlling him away in a way in both worlds, but in wholly different ways and completely different strategies, was really pretty amazing.
I think when you say door opener closed and she says both, wasn't that improvised? Or
yeah,
it was not in the script. I think we may have put all of us together, but it wasn't in the original script. But yeah, that was one of a number of moments that just sort of, I feel like Patricia sort of found in her sort of interesting experimentation.
Yeah, and I genuinely didn't know what to do with that.
Yeah.
What are some of your favorite moments just throughout filming? Like for me, it was like the dance party. It's so random because they theoretically had probably never danced before because they don't know what it's like on the outside world. So explain what it was like shooting the dance party or the waffle party or these various theme parties that were had.
Any of the party scenes.
Yeah.
Just Dan is kind of has the unique talent to create weird parties.
I should have been a party planner.
Who was the best
It would have
dancer?
been so much
In a
easier.
way.
Was it?
Who was the best dancer?
John.
Yeah.
Or
yeah.
Trammell, maybe.
I mean, Trammell is pretty
Well,
epic.
Trammell is just like,
Incredible.
I never saw dancing like.
John had to like tone down his dance. Like he had to like dance worse than he actually could, which I think is its own kind of challenge.
Yeah, but your dance, Adam, is like, I feel like that's become like a meme or a GIF or something. It's
Ben loved
like
Mark's
well,
dance
there's like
from
the
the very
moment I
start.
love. I've told Adam is like when Milchick pulls out the records, like this, like Mark, Adam's character Mark, like has this incredible fascination as he's pulling out the records, because you see that Mark had like the stimulation like this for these workers. This is a huge thing, and you see this sort of childlike, fascination with what's about to happen, because that's what's so kind of insidious, I guess, on a certain level about this company, is that they, these little rewards become big things in the lives of these people who only exist down here. So it was really fun for me to watch how each actor sort of interpreted that experience for themselves, and everybody really locked into their own way of dancing and reacting to it. And I feel like everybody really, figured that out for themselves.
Yeah. I think I will say another moment that for me was just a joy to watch was there's a scene where Bert is he's pacing around the conference room and he's trying to come up with a joke to tell Irving when he gets in. And so we got to watch, we did a lot of takes of that. And so I got to watch for like a couple hours, it felt like, as Christopher Walken just walked around and whispered little improvised jokes to himself, and was like, as Bert was like, okay, there's like a duck walks into a bar. No. And it was
amazing.
just, and he just came up with a bunch of different stuff over
Great.
the course of the day. And it was just I was just sitting there just trying not to cackle the whole time.
Man.
And they were good. He came up with some really funny jokes.
Christopher Walken is on our show, you guys. It's crazy.
How about that?
Crazy.
How about that?
Man.
Well, listen, Ben Stiller, Dan Erickson, Adam Scott, Jessica Gagne, Rachel Tenner. What an incredible series, incredible work on Severance. It's streaming on Apple TV+. Best of luck to the entire cast and crew at this year's Emmys, and anything would be so well deserved. Thank you for joining Gold Derby to talk about Severance today.